Today we'll study a very important topic, that is the anatomy of the nervous system. Anatomy of the nervous system. So as you know, the nervous system is divided into structurally classified into the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So the nervous system is classified into central as well as the peripheral nervous system. If you see the central nervous system, it consists of the brain and the spinal cord. So the brain within itself will have the cerebrum, diencephalon, brainstem, as well as the cerebellum. This all includes when we say brain. Okay. Then the spinal cord has uh, many segments and two large enlargements within the spinal cord, that is called as the cervical as well as the lumbosacral enlargements. These are the two enlargements within the spinal cord which has many segments. There are 31 segments there, and these are the two enlargements. Now, if you see the peripheral nervous system, it consists of the cranial nerves as well as the spinal nerves. Two types of nerves which are coming to different parts of the body from the central nervous system, with the cranial nerves and the spinal nerves. Cranial nerves, those nerves which are coming from the brain. There are 12 pairs. They are coming from the brain directly. So they are called as the cranial nerves, 12 pairs. Pairs mean on either side, right and left. If you see from the spinal cord, from this part, the nerves which are coming to different parts of the body, these are called as the spinal nerves because they are coming from the spinal cord. This is the spinal cord here, this is the brain, this is the spinal cord. The nerves which are coming from the spinal cord, they are called as the spinal nerves. And there are 31 pairs, 31 pairs. Cranial nerves are 12 pairs and the spinal nerves are 31 pairs. So here you can see this is the brain, and here will be the brain stem, then the cerebellum, the small brain, and this is the spinal cord, and these are the nerves coming out. So functionally, if we classify the nervous system, so this was before what classification we saw, that is the structural, what you see with your naked eyes, that is called a structural classification. Now functional, depending on the function, so it is also classified into the somatic nervous system and the automatic nervous system, that is called as the autonomic nervous system. So somatic nervous system, how it is different from this one? So this will be voluntary. So whatever you want to do, it can be done because of this somatic nervous system, which is under our control. So it is voluntary. So the nerves that take message from the sensory organs to the CNS and from the CNS to the sense organ, different sense organs. Okay. Sense organ includes even the all the limbs and other things, the muscles supplying the limbs, the nerves supplying the muscles of the limbs, upper limb, lower limb, everything. Coming to the autonomic nervous system, so this is, as I said, it is automatic, so it is involuntary, not under our control. So this somatic nerve is under our control, but this autonomic nervous system is not under our control. So that's why it's called as involuntary, not under our control. So it is involuntary autonomic nervous system. That is, the autonomic nervous system is classified into two types: sympathetic as well as the parasympathetic. Sympathetic and parasympathetic. Like this will be supplying the heart, the lungs, and other organs which are not under our control. Okay, so they will be doing two functions. One is sympathetic and parasympathetic. What the sympathetic and parasympathetic will be? So the sympathetic, if you see, if it is stimulated, it will increase the breathing, respiration. So it will be function, supplying the lungs, and it can increase the breathing, as well as it can increase the heart rate. Whenever the sympathetic is stimulated, it will increase the heart rate. Heart rate is not under our control, so it can be controlled only by the autonomic nervous system. It is automatic. Then the decreased digestive activity, it will be, whenever this is stimulated sympathetic, then it will decrease the digestive activity. We don't have the control under us to control, decrease or increase the digestive system. So it is all automatic. So it is all comes under the autonomic nervous system. So the parasympathetic will do just the opposite of what the sympathetic will do. So activities opposing the sympathetic system. So it will just oppose. Parasympathetic will do just the opposite. Here it is increase of breathing. Here it will decrease. Here it increases the heart rate. It will decrease the heart rate. Here it decreases the digestive system. Here it is increase the digestive system. That is the GI mortality. Okay. So this is the difference between the sympathetic and para. Both are involuntary, which are currently coming under the autonomic nervous system, and they'll be supplying the lungs, the heart, the intestines, the liver, all the organs, okay, which are inside our body. So this is the main classification depending on the function, somatic and autonomic. Somatic is which is under our control. We'll talk about it later. Okay, so here if you see here, this is the spinal cord, and if you can see here, there are nerves coming out. So the nerves which are coming from the spinal cord here, these are the sympathetic, which we said this is the sympathetic. Then we have the parasympathetic, so which are coming some from the cranium and some from the sacrum. So this is called as the craniosacral outflow. The nerves, cranial nerves like the third, seventh, ninth, and tenth, all these cranial nerves, which will be supplying the eye, the salivary glands, and some will supplying the lungs, everything. Okay, and here from the lower part of the sacrum that is coming here, that will be supplying the lower part of the GIT, the urinary bladder, and other structures. So these are the parasympathetic. Okay, so parasympathetic, this is parasympathetic, and before that, what we saw, this is the sympathetic. So these nerves are coming from directly from the spinal cord, starting from the T1 going up to L2, and all these will be coming here, and they relay in this chain here on either side. This is called a sympathetic chain because it is sympathetic fibers. They are sympathetic chain, and the nerves will be going again. They are supplying the heart, lungs here, all this. So here also you can see it is supplying the heart, lungs, everything. But it will just do the opposite. Parasympathetic will just do the opposite of the sympathetic. This is the sympathetic. So there are no cranial nerves here, no sacrum. Okay, only from the thoracic up to the second lumbar. So all these nerves will be supplying the same organs, but they will do the opposite function. Okay, so see, these are the sympathetic fibers. So the fibers can be presynaptic and postsynaptic. Synaptic means where they connect with each other. The presynaptic nerves have been shown with dotted lines, and here they relay, and the postsynaptic fibers will go and supply the organs. Okay. Here also you can see here presynaptic fibers. These are presynaptic is very long, and the postsynaptic will be very short here. Okay, here also you see here presynaptic and postsynaptic. Okay, so these are the two types of autonomic nervous system. So autonomic nervous system, parasympathetic, sympathetic, and parasympathetic. So here you can see this is the sympathetic, and this is the parasympathetic fibers. Okay. Now, if you see histologically through the microscope, if you want to study the nervous system, so the microscopic structure of the nervous system, how it looks like. Okay, if you see under the microscope, if you take a very small piece of the central nervous system and see under the microscope, what do you see? The nervous tissue consists of two main cells. There are two types of cells. One is the neurons, which will be carrying actually the messages from one part of the body to the other part, and these are called as nerve cells. And there are cells called as the neuroglia, are also called as the glial cells. The majority of them are these are one type of the neuroglial cells, glial cells, which help in the support of the neuron. So they are supportive cells. So one are the main cells, neurons, which will be relaying the message from one side to the other side. The main function of the nervous system is to send the message from one side to the other side. Okay, one part of the body to the other part. Okay, and the neuroglial, this is done by the nerve cells, and the neuroglial cells will help in the act as the supporting the neurons. Okay, the main cells. Neurons are the structural and functional unit of the nervous system. These neurons, which are said to be nerve cells, are the structural and functional unit of the nervous system. These are the most important cells, specialized for rapid communication, very rapid communication. As soon as you touch a hard plate or a hard something, suddenly it goes to the brain, and there will be impulses created from brain to remove the hand. So similarly, if you feel cold, okay, or different kind of sensation if you have a prick, so all these are carried by the main structure and functional units of the nervous system, that is the neurons, which are also called as the nerve cells. So if you see here, this is the picture of a neuron, how it looks like. So this is the picture of the neuron, which is the structural and functional unit of the whole of the nervous system. These are the main cells. A neuron is composed of cell body with processes called as dendrites and axons. So if you can see here, so these are called as the dendrites. So this is the cell body of the neuron. So this whole thing is a neuron. So this is the cell body of the neuron. Inside we have the nucleus, and there are processes. These are called as dendrites. Dendrites. And a single long process. This is called as the axon. So axon is the long process, and the dendrites are the short processes. Okay. So the dendrites which carry the impulses to the cell body. So the dendrites will carry the impulses toward the cell body. If you see here, so the arrow indicates the impulses. Anything impulses, it will be carried toward the cell body of the neuron. And axon which carries the impulses away from the cell body. And if you see here, this is the axon. It will carry the impulse away from the near this cell body of the neuron. Okay. Okay, this is the function of the dendrites and axon. Dendrites are short processes which bring the impulses to the cell body of the neuron. Axon is a long process which will carry the impulse away from the body. Okay, coming to the neuron. So the neuron is myelinated. There is something called as myelin. So if you see here, there is covering, especially for the axon. There is a covering. This is called as myelin. Myelin, layers of lipid and protein substance form a myelin sheath, a covering myelin sheath around some axons, greatly increasing the velocity of the conduction. So each of these axons will be covered by a sheath called as the myelin sheath. What is the function of the myelin sheath? It will increase the speed with which the impulse is carried. If there is myelin, it will carry the impulse very fast. Okay. Now coming to the neuroglial cells, these are the supporting cells as we saw. Okay, they form a major component of the nervous system, nervous tissue. So these are called as the neuroglial cells. They are the supporting cells. There are different types of neuroglial cells. Types of neuroglial cells. There are types and functions depending on their type. So there are oligodendrocytes, astrocytes, microglia, and ependymal cells. Oligodendrocytes form the myelin sheath. So this covering which is being formed, myelin sheath around the axon, is by these supporting cells called as the oligodendrocytes. Then we have something called as astrocytes. So they will support and maintain the increase intercellular environment. So they will maintain the intercellular environment of the main neuron cells. Okay, it has to be maintained regularly as well as supported. Then we have small cells called as the microglial cells. So these will act as the phagocytes. Phagocytes mean those cells which eat up the dead cells, bacteria, viruses, everything. So such kind of cells are called as the microglial cells. So these act as the phagocytes. So they eat up all the unwanted cells, dead cells, bacteria, virus, any kind of infection, everything. Okay. Then we have something called as ependymal cells, which secrete the cerebrospinal fluid. There is a very important fluid around the brain and the spinal cord called as the cerebrospinal fluid, which will be nourishing the whole of the nervous system. So this is called as the cerebrospinal fluid. It nourishes as well as gives the cushioning effect to the brain. Brain is very sensitive, so to protect it, it will be surrounded by this fluid called as the cerebrospinal fluid. It is approximated that around 100 billion neuroglial cells or the glial cells are present in the nervous system, about 5 times the number of the neurons. So around, if you imagine that there are 20 billion nerve cells, that is the neurons, there will be around 100 billion microglial cells, that is the supporting cells. So they are almost 5 times more than the number of the neuron cells. Even though the neuron cells are the main structure and functional unit of the nervous system, the neuroglial cells or the supporting cells are much more, almost 5 times more. Okay, so now here you can see here, so this is one neuroglial cell. Okay, so this is the oligodendrocyte. This is one of the types of neuroglial cells. You see here, it is covering, this is the axon here of one of the neuron, so it is forming, covering it. Okay, then it is also giving the process and covering many parts of the, not only the same neuron but also the axon of others also. So it will give multiple process and it forms a covering around each of this axon. So this is called as the myelin sheath, which is formed by the oligodendrocytes. Then we have astrocytes. Astrocytes are called as astrocytes because they look like asteroids. Okay, they look like the stars with a lot of processes. Asteroids. Okay, so that's why they are called as the astrocytes. And if you say here, they will be forming they will be connecting the neuroglial cells with the blood vessels, and they form the perivascular feet around each of these vessels. Okay, so these are called as the astrocytes. Then we have the microglial cells, which I said will form the phagocyte, helping phagocytosis. That is the engulf the foreign material. Any dead cells or the foreign material will be engulfed by the microglial cells. Then we have the ependymal cells, which will form the lining of the cerebrospinal fluid, the cavity, the central canal, the spinal cord, and then they will be producing the CSF. Okay. So these are the different types of supporting cells called as the neuroglial cells. Now coming to the different parts of the central nervous system. Okay. So the central nervous system, the brain constitutes about 1/5 of the body total body weight and lies within the cranial cavity. So actually it will be 1/50th. Okay. So initially in the development it will be 1/5. Then the initially in the during development the head will be much more larger, so it will be 1/5. But in case of adult, it will be 1/50th of the whole body weight and lies within the cranial cavity. Okay, so the parts of the brain will be the cerebrum. What you are seeing, this is called as the cerebral hemispheres. There will be right and left hemisphere. There are two hemispheres, right and left. Okay, this is called as the cerebrum. It is also called as the cerebral hemisphere. Then we have the cerebellum, the small brain. This is also called as the small brain, or it is called as the cerebellum. Then we have diencephalon. Inside that there are some important nuclei called as the diencephalon. Okay, thalamus, epithalamus, hypothalamus, all included in the diencephalon. Then we have the brain stem. This is the brain stem. So it acts like a stem between the cerebral hemispheres and the spinal cord. So it will be connecting. So this is called as the brain stem. So the brain stem has three parts. From above downwards, it will be midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. Midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. And the cerebellum will be just behind the pons. Okay, and in connection to the midbrain as well as the medulla oblongata also. Coming to the cerebrum, as I said, there is cerebrum. This is the side view. Now, if you take a section at this side like this, then you can see the two hemispheres. The one is the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. There are two hemispheres, right and left, and in the center they are connected. So these are called as the cerebrum or the cerebral hemispheres. Okay, this is the largest part of the brain. It is divided, as you can see in this part. So this is the largest part of the whole of the brain. Okay, It is divided by a deep cleft, the longitudinal cerebral fissure. If you see here, this is the deep cleft which separates the two cerebral hemispheres. This is called as the longitudinal cerebral hemisphere, or it is also called as the longitudinal fissure. So the a deep cleft called as the longitudinal cerebral hemisphere will divide the whole of the cerebrum into right and left cerebral hemispheres, each containing one of the lateral ventricles. Within that, there will be small cavity. These are called as the lateral ventricle on either side. Each cerebral hemisphere will have one lateral ventricle. The superficial or the peripheral part of the cerebrum is composed of the nerve cell bodies or gray matter. If you see here, it has two parts. Outer we have cerebral cortex and inner part is called as the medulla. Medulla. So cerebral cortex is made up of the cell bodies of the neurons, and it is called as gray matter. It looks grayish, so it is called as the gray matter, forming the cerebral cortex. And the deep part, this is the deep part, deeper medulla. The deeper layer consists of nerve fibers or white matter. So inner part will have nerve fibers coming from the cell bodies here. Cell bodies will be here, so it is gray matter, and the nerve fibers, they will look white because they are myelinated, covered by the myelin sheath. So they look white. That's why it is called as the white matter. So this is the white matter here, and this is the gray matter. Coming to the further about the cerebrum, the cerebral cortex shows many foldings of varying depth. If you see here, the cerebral hemisphere is not a soft, completely even surface, but it will show many foldings, lot of foldings, okay, of varying depth. The exposed area of the folds are called as the gyri. Though the elevated part, this is called as the gyri, and these are separated by sulci. In between there is groove. This is called as the sulci. So this groove is called as sulci, and this elevated part is called as the gyri. These convolutions greatly increase the surface area of the cerebrum. Why it is so? Why it is present like this? Why not soft area? Because it will increase the surface area many times, many times. Okay, so that's why it is showing lot of convolutions and elevations. Elevations are called as gyri, and the convolutions, the depressions are called as sulci. Each hemisphere of the cerebrum is divided into lobes, which take the name of the bones of the cranium under which they lie. So, if you see, the whole of the cerebral hemisphere is divided into four lobes. Okay, depending on which bone is above them. So, outside we have the cranial cavity and the cranium, the bones made up of the cranium. So same names will be taken by the cerebrum also. So in front of the frontal bone is there here above, and just deep to that will be the frontal lobe. Uh, Above will be the parietal bone, and just below that will be the parietal lobe. Behind will be the occipital bone, and this is the occipital lobe. And on the lateral side, we'll have the temporal bone, so this is called as temporal lobe. So there are four lobes: the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe. These are the four lobes of the cerebrum. How they are named? Depending on which bone the bone outside is lying. Okay. Coming to the functions of the cerebrum. So, what are the functions of the cerebrum? Because the functions are the most important thing which make the cerebrum very important and special. There are three main varieties of activity associated with the cerebral cortex. What are those activities which are uh, um, the cavity activities which are associated with the cerebral cortex? One is the mental activity, then sensory perception. Perception means feeling of the sensation, and initiation and control of the skeletal muscles. We'll talk about them one by one. One is the first is the mental activities. So this mental activity involves the memory, keeping something in memory, keeping this lecture in memory is a mental activity. Intelligence, how you produce it, it is intelligent. Sense of responsibility, you have the responsibility of different types. Okay, as a student, as a child, many things, many roles. So all those responsibilities sense of responsibility is also mental activity. Thinking, so you will go into deep thinking. So this is also mental activity. Reasoning, why it is so, why it is such a thing. So all these reasonings will be also mental activity. The moral sense, the moral dignity is also mental activity. And learning, learning new things. Today you did not know of the about the cerebrum. Now you are learning so many things. So this is also a mental activity. So learning. So all these are the mental activities which are attributed to the higher centers in the cerebral cortex. Within the cerebrum, there are different higher centers which will be help are responsible for all these activities like intelligence, sense of responsibility, thinking, reasoning, moral sense, and learning. Okay, then we have the sensory perception, sensation, including the perception, feeling of the pain. Okay, so if somebody hits, you feel pain. The temperature, if there is hot or cold outside, you feel the temperature. You will feel the sensation of touch, as well as you see with your eyes, hear with your ears, taste with your tongue, different types of taste, as well as you smell different types of smells. So all these are related to sensory perception. So you will be feeling the pain, temperature, touch, sight, hearing, taste, and smell. All these are different types of sensory perceptions. Then there are motor perceptions. Okay, motor functions, initiation and control of the skeletal muscle, which is under the voluntary control. Okay, so the muscle contraction. If you want to, if you feel the pain, if there is some prick and you feel the pain, suddenly you remove the hand because there will be development of a motor a relay, and it will go to the muscle and it will command the muscle to withdraw your hand. So the muscle contractions, all these are taking place because of the motor function. So there are mental activities without any sensory or motor perceptions. Then there are sensory perceptions and like different type, pain, temperature, everything. Then there are motor functioning, muscle contraction and other things. So all these are some of the important functions of the cerebrum. Now coming to the diencephalon, I said there is something called as diencephalon within the brain. Okay, so this diencephalon constituted by the thalamus, hypothalamus, and other related structures, epithalamus, everything. Okay, so if you see here, this is the thalamus. So this is the thalamus, this is the hypothalamus. Okay, so here if you see here, this will be the thalamus and here will be the hypothalamus. Okay, so all these structures here will be which are part of the diencephalon. There are other smaller structures, but the main structure is the thalamus and the hypothalamus epithalamus. Okay, so these have a very important function. Okay, then going to the midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. That is the part of the brain stem. So the first part of the brain stem will be the midbrain. The midbrain is the area of the brain between the cerebrum above and the pons below. If you see here, above is the cerebrum and below is the pons. In between, whatever structure is there, that is called as the midbrain. It consists of group of cells, bodies, and nerve fibers, that is tracts, which connect the cerebrum with the lower part of the brain. So if you see here, this midbrain will have some tracts, fibers going above as well as coming down. So it will be connecting the lower fibers to the brain and the brain to the different parts of the body. Okay, so those go in the form of tracts. Okay, multiple fibers, a bundle of fibers is called as tracts. Okay, so it consists of group of cell bodies and nerve fibers, tracts which connect the cerebrum with the lower part of the brain, cerebrum with the lower part of the brain, and with the spinal cord. With the spinal cord, the cell bodies act as relay stations for the ascending and descending nerve fibers. There will be cell bodies of the neurons which will be acting as the relay centers for ascending and descending nerve fibers. So there are ascending tracts which are going from the spinal cord to the above, so especially the sensory tracts. Okay, then the motor tracts will be coming from the cerebrum and passing to the spinal cord and goes to the different muscles of the body. Then we have the pons. So here is the pons. This is called as the pons. Pons is situated in front of the cerebrum. As I said, cerebrum will be behind. Just opposite to that will be the pons. Below the midbrain and above the medulla oblongata. It will be between the midbrain and the medulla oblongata. Midbrain will be above, and the medulla oblongata will be below, and in between is the pons. It consists mainly of the nerve fibers which form a bridge between the two hemispheres of the cerebellum and of fibers passing between the higher levels of the brain and the spinal cord. So it consists of the nerve fibers which form a bridge between the two hemispheres. Here there are two hemispheres as we saw, of the cerebrum and of the fibers passing between the higher levels of the brain and the spinal cord. So all these fibers which are passing the midbrain also pass through the pons and the medulla oblongata. Now coming to the medulla oblongata, apart from the fibers which I said will be ascending and descending, passing through it, it has some very important parts. Okay, it extends from the pons. This is the medulla. We are talking now about the medulla oblongata. It extends from the pons above and it's continuous with the spinal cord below. Below with the spinal cord, above will be pons. In between is the medulla oblongata, and it ends at the foramen magnum. Foramen magnum is the largest, what we can say, the foramen in the base of the skull. The base of the skull, there are many openings. So this is foramen magnum is the largest opening. Functions of the foramen magnum, the medulla oblongata, sorry, the vital centers lie in its deeper structure. So if you medulla oblongata, not only sending fibers above and below, just like the pons and medulla oblongata, but there are very important centers within the medulla oblongata. These are the cardiac center, respiratory center, vasomotor center, as well as the reflex centers for vomiting, coughing, sneezing, and swallowing. So all these centers are present here in the medulla oblongata. So medulla oblongata plays a very important role because it helps in the cardiac. There will be a cardiac center which controls the heart, respiratory center which controls the respiratory system, vasomotor system, as well as the vasomotor means the vessels. It is controlling the dilatation and relaxation of the vessels, blood vessels. Then also we have the reflex centers of vomiting, coughing, sneezing, and swallowing here in the medulla oblongata. Now coming to the cerebellum. After the cerebrum, the spinal cord. Now we are talking about the cerebellum, which is also said to be the small brain. Okay, the cerebellum is situated behind the pons. This is behind the pons and immediately below the posterior portion of the cerebrum, occupying the posterior cranial fossa. So within the cranial cavity in the skull, if you see here, there will be three parts: anterior cranial fossa, middle cranial fossa, and posterior cranial fossa. The anterior cranial fossa will be occupied by the frontal lobe, and the middle part will be occupied by the temporalis, this temporal lobe, and the posterior cranial fossa will be occupied with the especially the occipital lobe as well as the cerebellum. So it is ovoid. If you see this shape, it will be ovoid in shape and has two hemispheres. Just like the cerebrum has two hemispheres, this also has two hemispheres, separated by a narrow median strip called as the vermis. In between the two cerebellar hemispheres, not cerebral, these are called as the cerebellar hemispheres. It also has hemispheres. It is connected by the vermis. What is the function of this cerebellum? Cerebellum will help in the control of the movements, balance, and coordination. Very important function is done by the cerebellum. Even though it is very small, it helps in the balance of the whole body. So in case of the person who is drunk or taken liquor, so his cerebellum becomes incapable of controlling his body and he is keeps swinging. Okay, so it helps in the very much helps in the balance of the body as well as the coordinated movements of the body, the fine movements like you are writing, you are drawing something, or you are doing some skilled work with your hands and fingers. All those coordinated movements are done by the cerebellum. Finally, coming to the spinal cord. This is the spinal cord here, long structure. Below the medulla oblongata is the spinal cord. Spinal cord is elongated cylindrical part of the central nervous system. As you can see here, it is elongated as well as cylindrical. It looks like a cylindrical part of the nervous system. It lies in the vertebral canal. So within the vertebral bone, there is a cavity within which this spinal cord is well protected. That is called as the vertebral canal, surrounded by meninges. Meninges are nothing but the coverings of the brain and the spinal cord, as well as the cerebrospinal fluid, which is called as CSF. Okay, so which are produced by the ependymal cells. So that fluid will be covering the spinal cord as well as the brain. Okay, it consists above with the medulla oblongata. As you know, it is attached to above to medulla oblongata and extends from the upper part of the atlas. Atlas is the first vertebra in the neck. The first vertebra is called atlas. To the lower body of the first lumbar vertebra, it will go all the way up to the first lumbar vertebra. This is the, here will be the first lumbar vertebra. So this is the first cervical vertebrae here. These are cervical nerves, and here is the cervical vertebrae will be there. Vertebra are not shown here, thoracic, and it will end at the first lumbar vertebra. The distal end of the cord, the conus medullaris, is cone shape. If you see here, the lower part of the spinal cord looks like a cone. So it is called as conus medullaris. Conus medullaris. It is nothing but the cone of the spinal cord. Then it will show two important enlargements, swellings. I said it is all cylindrical, like it is just like a cylinder from above downwards. But there are 2 points where it will be enlarged. This is called as the cervical enlargement, and there is lumbosacral enlargement, where it is dilated. Why it is dilated, this part we'll see. So there are two enlargements. One is called as cervical enlargement. This is the cervical enlargement. Then the lumbosacral enlargement here. So the cervical enlargement occurs in the region associated with the origin of the spinal nerve C5 to T1, which innervate the upper limb. So from here, all the nerves of the upper limb are going. So that's why it is dilated. Similarly, in the lumbosacral region here, occurs in the region associated with the origin of the spinal nerves L1 to S3, which innervate the lower limb. So here, the fiber nerves are going to the lower limb. So that's why it is enlarged here as well as here. Here upper limb, here will be the nerves to the lower limb. So the spinal cord, if you take cross section of the spinal cord, this is how it looks like. If you cut the spinal cord, this is how it looks like. Okay, this is the spinal cord. Cross section of the spinal cord shows that it is composed of a central H-shaped gray matter. If you see here, it looks like a H-shaped gray matter. So here in the spinal cord, the gray matter is inside. If you remember, in case of the cerebrum, the gray matter was outside here, gray matter, and the white fibers were inside. In the spinal cord, it will be just opposite. So in case of the spinal cord, the gray matter is inside, not outside, but inside in the form of H-shaped structure. Central H-shaped gray matter containing the cell bodies. So wherever there is gray matter, it will be cell bodies, and around will be the white matter, where there will be the fibers running. White matter outside, gray matter inside. Okay. So peripheral part, white matter surround the gray matter, form the axons. There will be a lot of fibers running, tracts. Okay, ascending and descending tracts. Then there is central canal. If you see at the center, the central canal filled with the cerebrospinal fluid. So the central canal will be filled with CSF, as well as even surrounding there will be CSF. Now coming to the nerves coming from the spinal nerves. We said before that there are 31 pairs of spinal nerves. Okay. So here if you see here, these are the cranial nerves. Cranial nerves coming from the brain, they are called as the cranial nerves. The nerves which are coming from the spinal cord, these are called as the spinal nerves. Spinal nerves. So the total of 31 pairs of spinal nerves are there, which leave the spinal cord. So there are 31 pairs because they are on either side. Okay, the spinal nerves are named according to the region of vertebral column with which they are associated. So they are named according to the vertebrae around them. So in case of neck, there will be cervical vertebrae. So it will be the 8 cervical nerves will be coming out here. 8 cervical nerves. Here the thoracic vertebra. So the nerves coming will be the thoracic nerves. There will be 12 pairs of the thoracic nerve. Then here there will be lumbar vertebra. So the nerves coming out will be the lumbar nerves. There are five pairs of lumbar nerves. All are in pairs. Then we have the sacral vertebrae. So the nerves coming will be the sacral nerves, five sacral nerves, so five pairs of sacral. Then we have the coccygeal bones here. Okay, and one coccygeal pair of nerve will come out. So there are eight cervical, eight pairs of cervical nerves, 12 pairs of the thoracic, five pairs of lumbar, five pairs of sacral, and one pair of the coccygeal nerves will be coming out from the spinal cord. So this is all about this lecture, which is about the brain as well as the spinal cord. So if you have any doubts regarding this, you can ask me now.